All right. There's a video on blood, right? So Dracula's going to love this video. And mosquitoes, right? The female mosquitoes, because they're the only ones who actually suck your blood. And of course, let's see, well, leeches, right? And many others. So let's get some myths out of the way. Your blood, here it is red. And I know there's a lot of myths out there that your blood is blue until it reaches the surface. That is not true. That is never true. Your blood is always red. So I'll use blue to say that your blood is never blue. It's never blue, even though you hear people say it because your veins look blue. And the reasons why your veins, the reason why they look blue is because of visible light. So let's get a clear page here. All right, and let's stick with the blue pen. Right. So it's all because of visible light. Visible light. And again, visible light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic spectrum. Sounds fancy. Now, in this spectrum, right, you have from radio waves, which are the longest wavelengths, all the way to the shortest, which are gamma. This is all light. We're talking about light. So in the middle, right, we have visible light. We'll just say VL, visible light. And in the visible light, we have these colors, right? So white, basically, when it enters a prism, it's white. And then when it enters a prism, you probably saw the Pink Floyd album, right? Let's get a picture of that. All right, here's the Pink Floyd album, Dark Side of the Moon, in case you want to buy it. So if you see this prism here, you see the white light enters the prism, and of course we have all the colors of the rainbow coming out of that. And this is all visible light. It's only a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, so let's use green. Why not? So here's the reason why our veins are not blue. So blue has a shorter wavelength. I should have used blue, right? Blue has a shorter wavelength, than red. It's not the shortest wavelength of visible light. Actually, violet is. But our eyes do not have violet cones, so we don't see violet as well as blue. So the if you're looking at the wavelength of blue, it's about 475 nanometers. Put nm, nanometers. But red has the longest wavelength of visible light. Red has the longest wavelength of visible light. Just put VL, visible light. And so we're looking about 700 nanometers, right? So because of red's long wavelength, it's able to penetrate more into your skin, whereas the blue light doesn't penetrate as far into the tissue. So let me say this again. Blue light does not penetrate as far into your skin or your tissue as red light does. So red light could penetrate more and it's put red, why not? It could penetrate into your skin about 5 to 10 millimeters. That's a lot. And if you need more information about the electromagnetic spectrum and all the other stuff about colors of the rainbow, I have videos on that also you can look up. Okay, so again, blue does not penetrate as far into your skin. The red light does. So the blue light is reflected back at you and the red light is not. But if you shine a red flashlight on your skin, you will see because the red light will reflect back at you. And red light also absorbed by hemoglobin, as you see up here. And we'll talk about hemoglobin in a minute. So here's our next question we should ask, and make sure our pen is ready. We'll stick with red. What is it? What is blood? Right? We need it to survive. If it stops flowing, we can die. So here's the thing about blood. It's not only a fluid. We'll say it's a fluid, but it's also a tissue. Not a Kleenex tissue, but it's a tissue. So let's talk about that, what it is. Right? For the basic part of what blood does is it transports oxygen. We need that oxygen to our cells. Transports oxygen to our cells. Well, not just oxygen. Oxygen, let's put an N, and nutrients, right, that our cells need. Right? Glucose enters our blood. We talked about them before. So it transports oxygen and nutrients to our cells. It also, what else do you think it does? It gets rid of waste. It's rid of waste products, and it carries away, gets carried away. No, it carries away carbon dioxide. All right, so that's really the basic function of blood. And like I said before, this molecule over here, this hemoglobin, that's going to help. It's going to attach itself to a red blood cell. This is the red blood cell you're seeing here. That's, guess what color it is? Red, right? So over here is the red blood cell, and it has hemoglobin in it, and it's going to carry oxygen, and it's also going to carry CO2. So all this is happening. We know that blood comes in from our heart. We have about 5 liters of blood. All right, so the blood is actually coming from bone marrow. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but it's pumping from the heart. You know this. I don't have to tell you that it's pumping from the heart. And so this whole process here, and let's just change the color over here. This is all part of the circulatory system, right? Circulatory system. Circulatory system, which moves the blood, right? It moves the blood, right? And from this heart, right, it's circling all over the body, and it comes back to the heart. It circulates all over the body and comes back to the heart in about 45 seconds. It's doing this over and over again throughout the day, and your heart will pump about 100,000 times a day. So do the math if you're talking about decades, right? And by the way, that's just the average human. It could change. Now, it's not just the circulatory system that's involved in blood. It's also the respiratory system because we need oxygen. We need that oxygen because blood is carrying the oxygen. Just think of these red blood cells over here. Let's make a little red blood cell over here. We should have made it red. Well, here it is, this red blood cell. And so it's carrying the oxygen, carries it, and when it gets to its cells, it takes away the junk and brings it back, right? And brings it to your lungs so you can get rid of that CO2. You know we breathe in oxygen and get rid of CO2. You know that, right? And so here is what blood is made up of. You see the red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, which I talked about in another video before, and plasma. So let's get our pen going, right? So we can define these. So we'll start with plasma, right? Plasma, this yellow looking fluid. Plasma is the liquid. It's the liquid part of your blood, right? And it's made of salts. It's made of water. And it comes actually from the digestive tract, right? So from your digestive tract, it's absorbing those salts in that water. And the red blood cells, again, I say, let's point to the red blood cells and put a little arrow over there. The red blood cells are the ones that are they're going to carry the oxygen to the cells and fix that W, CO2, carbon dioxide. So, and they have hemoglobin, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the white blood cells are our protectors, right? They're protecting us from any bacteria or anything that gets into our blood. They're roaming the blood as guards. And platelets clot blood. They clot blood. So if you ever get there, let's say you get a cut, you need platelets to help form a clot to stop the bleeding. Right? And plasma is that liquid, so all this can work. So that's what the blood is made of. And by the way, plasma makes up about 55% of your blood. The red blood cells make up 45% of the blood, and the rest are the white blood cells and the platelets. And the platelets are very small compared to the red blood cells, and the red blood cells are smaller than the white blood cells. So I did mention before that blood is also a tissue, which is kind of strange to some people. So let's look at these level of organizations, right? We have cell, and a bunch of cells is a tissue, and a bunch of tissues is an organ. And then organs have an organ system where a bunch of organs together are working. Like we talked about the circulatory system, where it's moving the blood, and the respiratory system that's bringing in that oxygen. So why is blood a tissue? So tissues, and I'll write it over here, and maybe we'll use blue. We'll use blue, right? So a tissues are a collection of cells. And blood, remember, it has red blood cells, it has white blood cells, it also has platelets. So they're specialized cells that it has. The liquid part of blood is what? Let's do a little test. What did I say is the liquid part of blood? Plasma, right? And I said plasma is made of water and salts. Oh, and by the way, plasma is also made of proteins. So the solid part of blood is the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. So that's why it's called a tissue. And where does our blood come from? It comes from bone marrow, like I said earlier in the video. So the bone marrow produces stem cells that will produce red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Now, the plasma I said before, that's coming from the digestive tract. So the digestive tract, it's absorbing the water and the salts from the digestive tract. All right, so let's talk about more of the red blood cells because they're the ones that are carrying this oxygen that we need for our cells. By the way, these red blood cells, they do not have DNA. So we have 30 trillion cells in our body, but the red blood cells don't have DNA. Other cells, like the white blood cells, have DNA. So here are the red blood cells, right? They're also called erythrocytes. So let me write that down. You might hear it as erythrocytes. And we'll use green. It should go perfect with the red. So erythrocytes are red blood cells. That's all they are, erythrocytes. So we'll just say red blood cells. So again, they don't have DNA, like I said, but they have hemoglobin on them. They have this protein. They have a protein called hemoglobin. Made that I a little too big. All right, so hemoglobin is the protein that's going to carry oxygen. It's going to carry oxygen, and it's also going to carry CO2. Right? So when the red blood cell is traveling in your blood to your cells, let's say here's a cell over here, it's going to drop off some oxygen, drop off the oxygen. Your cells just ordered from Grubhub. They ordered oxygen. Drop off the oxygen. And then they're going to say, hey, do you have any waste? And they're going to say, yes, take the CO2. And they take the CO2 and they bring it to the lungs. And the lungs will say, okay, here's your CO2. Here is, the red blood cell says, here's your CO2. And the lungs say, well, here's the oxygen. It's like an even exchange, and then the red blood cells go back to the cell. So it happens over and over again. So it's the hemoglobin that's the very important protein that is carrying that oxygen. And on that protein, on that hemoglobin, they have another protein, heme, right? And that heme has an iron atom on it. Has an iron atom, Iron Man, right? And iron atom helps bind to oxygen. And of course, with that iron, we get that reddish tint, right? Mars has a lot of iron in their soil, and it has that orange red tint to it also. Now, iron will also, that iron atom in the hem will also bond with carbon dioxide. Now, here's something that's dangerous, though. It also binds with carbon monoxide, which is very dangerous. So I'll talk about carbon monoxide in a minute. Just make sure we understand this, right? The protein, hemoglobin, it's carrying the oxygen. The hem protein has this iron atom, and it's the iron atom that really helps bind oxygen and bind carbon dioxide. And so it's an even exchange. We bring the oxygen from the lungs to the cells, and we take the waste products from the cells, the carbon dioxide, and bring it to the lungs. And it's going over and over and over again. Right? And so those red blood cells will do this over and over again for at least 120 days. They're replaced. Takes about 120 days on average to get new red blood cells. And here's a better picture. Show our pens are ready. We'll use red. So you see over here that little protein inside the hemoglobin, the hem, right? That's actually containing the iron atom. Now, I did mention a dangerous gas, carbon monoxide. And mono means one, not carbon dioxide. Dioxide is the one, that we breathe out, the CO2. That's carbon dioxide because it has two oxygen. But the carbon monoxide is dangerous, right? It could bind with hem, that iron atom, 200 times greater than oxygen can. So when people have carbon monoxide poisoning, it's because there's that strong bond that's happening with the carbon monoxide and the red blood cells, that hem. And so you end up not being able to breathe because it's very hard to break that bond. Now, the other thing about blood before we end is there's different blood types, right? And there's a separate video for blood types, but let's just look at some of them. Right? And there's more blood types than this chart has. There's some really rare blood types. But the most common, I wouldn't say the most, well, the most common is O positive. O positive right here is the most common. And blood types have nothing to do with ethnicity. They have nothing to do with religion or any of that stuff. Nothing to do with your skin color. So you can have someone who is Caucasian and someone who's African American, someone who's an Hispanic or Asian. They could be all in the same room and they could all have the same blood type. So we're going to talk more about blood types in another video, but that's blood for today.